now. So this is our second class on the guiding principles of Reform Judaism. As I mentioned last time, there is something called the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Basically, it's the organization of Reform rabbis, of which I am a member. From time to time, they have met and decided on guiding principles of Reform Judaism. So the last one was the so-called Pittsburgh Platform, which I think was like 1898. Does that sound right? 1885, sorry, 1885. And so now this one is the Columbus Platform of 1937. So, it looks like somewhere around 50 years have passed. And hang on, I'm going to mute these guys. Okay, so let's see, go to the share screen. And okay, so anyway, let's get right to it. So it's 50 years later. It is, of course, we're now in 1937. We're leading up to World War II. I would say by 1937, some of you are more historian than I. We're clearly in the stage where the Holocaust, and the activities in Nazi Germany are very serious, and so Reform rabbis are meeting to decide on the next set of platforms. So, can someone like to read?
If no one else wants to do it, I will do it.
Okay, thank you, Price.
Okay. I think I'm all right. The Guiding Principles of Reform Judaism, the Columbus Platform, 1937. In view of the changes that have taken place in the modern world and the consequent need of stating anew the teachings of Reform Judaism, the Central Conference of American Rabbis makes the following declaration of principles. It presents them not as a fixed creed, but as a guide for the progressive elements of Jewry.
I'll make a comment on that. Judaism is not very big on creeds or articles of faith. There really aren't any, although there are some with that title. And the best known one is Maimonides, who has 13 principles of faith. And they are principles of faith, but to my knowledge, they're not used anywhere in Judaism as principles of faith or as creeds. And I say that because in other religious traditions, you have creeds, and converts will affirm those creeds. Priests, ministers, pastors will affirm those creeds, but certainly I was never asked to affirm any particular creed. But clearly, the Reform movement had a need and a desire to explain what it stands for. Bryce, what?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, having come from Christianity, Christianity tends to not only have creeds, but they act as a shibboleth. I mean, if you don't believe them, and if you don't profess to believe them, you need to find somewhere else to go.
Yes, and I comment on that all the time, that in Christianity, I would say belief is primary, so faith is primary, and actions, what Christians would call works, what Jews would call mitzvot, are secondary. And in Judaism, I would say mitzvot and actions are primary, and faith is secondary. In both traditions, you literally can't have one without the other. So presumably, if you were someone who was Jewish and had no beliefs in common with Judaism, you wouldn't worry about, keeping kosher and other, complying with other mitzvot. And in Christianity, I often point out when I heard a pastor talking about this, he said there were 43,000 different branches of Christianity. And again, I think that's true, because if you have, a branch of Christianity and along comes a church that says, well, we can accept 14 of the 15 of the articles of faith or the statement of creed, they've really got to go form another church, another movement. So I think it's absolutely true, and it varies. In fundamentalist Christianity, proper belief is absolutely primary. In Catholicism, there is a statement, actually a quote from the New Testament, which says, "Faith without works is dead." So I would say Catholicism has also a great emphasis on proper actions, and there's a lot of church law, which to me is very reminiscent of Jewish law, of rabbinic law. Okay.
So what I just wanted to make a quick follow-up to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we should not neglect considering is the role of social compulsion in keeping people within a particular faith. I'm like, especially Christian faiths, that they're so very family and so very group-oriented that if you were to disagree with them, you are literally considering abandoning your family and everyone you know.
Yeah, and I would say that's true, also in Judaism and some of the Hasidic sects.
Mm-hmm.
And probably true in Islam also, although I'm less familiar with that. But also there are many branches of Christianity where people will hop from one Christian movement to another, I would say without familial alarm. I know people that in their path, typically these are people that ultimately become Jewish, and they will tell me about their own path through different church movements. But I would say the more fundamentalist you get,
Yes.
the more that is true.
Want me to go on?
Yeah, please.
Judaism and its foundations. Nature of Judaism. Judaism is the historical religious experience of the Jewish people. Through growing out of Jewish life, its message is universal. Though growing out of Jewish life, its message is universal, aiming at the union and perfection of mankind under the sovereignty of God. Reform Judaism recognizes the principle of progressive development in religion and consciously applies this principle to spiritual as well as to cultural and social life. Judaism welcomes all truth, whether written in the pages of Scripture or deciphered from the records of nature. The new discoveries of science, while replacing the older scientific views underlying our sacred literature, do not conflict with the essential spirit of religion as manifested in the consecration of man's will, heart, and mind to the service of God and of humanity.
Okay, so there certainly is a progression here. And this idea, I would say one of the hallmarks of Reform Judaism is universalism, rather than particularism, rather than focusing on a closed Jewish community and focusing on ourselves. I would say, certainly to this day, a major element of Reform Judaism is reaching out to non-Jewish people and and cultures, and I think that I wrote a book for Christians about Judaism, and I speak to many Christians, and sometimes that's a choice. So, for example, there's a Catholic series of local sort of seminars that occur in the fall, and they, for many years, never had a rabbi come and talk about Judaism because they always took place on Saturdays. And the rabbis that they were familiar with would not travel and do this kind of program on Saturday, or they may have been tied up with, congregations. And so I was the first rabbi who would do that. And, my own judgment that the benefits of interfaith understanding were greater than the issues of violating the Sabbath. Although they also do often have these programs on Yom Kippur, at least one of the sessions. Okay, and then of course, also near and dear to my heart is this question of discoveries of science. So if you think about it, in the 20s and 30s, the world of science is being revolutionized, both by quantum mechanics and atomic physics, relativity. So it's clearly Judaism and Reform Judaism is not ignoring that. Okay, let's continue with God.
2. God. The heart of Judaism and its chief contribution to religion is the doctrine of the one living God who rules the world through law and love. In him, all existence has its creative source and mankind its ideal of conduct. Though transcending time and space, he is the indwelling presence of the world. We worship him as the Lord of the universe and as our merciful Father.
Okay, so this is powerful. I mean, I will review the other later statements, but I don't think Reformed Judaism ever separated itself from the idea of a personal God. And you know, as a counterexample, you have Reconstructionist Judaism that defined God as the tendency in the universe that tends towards goodness and salvation, and rejected the idea of a personal choosing God. And certainly Reform Judaism doesn't do that. And you know, the interesting thing here is the capitalization of the word presence. One of the rabbinic names for God is Hamakom, which means the place. So references to God in Hebrew is Hamakom, which can mean presence or place. Even Shekhinah could be understood as the presence of God. And certainly it's masculine here, Lord Adonai and Avinu. And a God who rules the world through both law and love. So this is, you know, a pretty traditional understanding of God.
Man. Judaism affirms that man is created in the divine image. His spirit is immortal. He is an active co-worker with God. As a child of God, he is endowed with moral freedom and is charged with the responsibility of overcoming evil and striving after ideal ends.
I'm very interested with the idea that they have this line, the spirit is immortal. So it's not 100% clear what there's no theology of an afterlife here.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's as far as they're willing to go.
Torah. God reveals himself not only in the majesty, beauty, and orderliness of nature, but also in the vision and moral striving of the human spirit. Revelation is a continuous process confined to no one group and to no one age. Yet the people of Israel, through its prophets and sages, achieved unique insight in the realm of religious truth. The Torah, both written and oral, enshrines Israel's ever-growing consciousness of God and of the moral law. It preserves the historical precedents, sanctions, and norms of Jewish life, and seeks to mold it in the patterns of goodness and holiness. I don't think they meant that. Being products of historical processes, certain of its laws have lost their binding force with the passing of the conditions that called them forth. But as a depository of permanent spiritual ideals, the Torah remains the dynamic source of the life of Israel. Each age has the obligation to adapt the teachings of the Torah to its basic needs in consonance with the genius of Judaism.
Okay. So, I mean, certainly we see a difference in Reform Judaism than traditional Judaism. So the idea that the revelation is not confined to any one group or any one age, but it is affirming that there is a unique, I guess, insight into the realm of religious truth in Jewish revelation and Jewish, in Torah, both written and oral. So, you know, by oral here, they're talking about Talmud.
Question, do they mean by revelation the unfolding of meaning, or do they mean that someone is revealing it, you know? I mean, how do they mean revelation?
Well, look at the first line. God reveals himself.
Right, but I mean, okay, so God is always revealing himself through nature, but also, okay, I got it. All right,
yeah.
thanks.
My understanding of the word, when I think of the word revelation, I think of scripture.
Mhm.
And oral, written, but Quran, New Testament, other scripture. It's the idea that there is a God who communicates with the world. I always talk about two leaps of faith. Is there a God? And there I just look to physics and the symmetry and of the universe, and that satisfies me on that question. Then the second leap of faith I often talk about is, does God care? And if the answer, and I believe that second leap of faith really has no specific evidence, but if you accept the idea, which I would say is a religious leap of faith, that God cares, then it follows logically from me that God would express God's caring to humanity. If God cares about humanity, it doesn't make sense to me that God would just stand off and not involve God's self with humanity, but God would communicate what God expects of humanity, and that's what I think of as revelation. That's sort of the way I logically understand that.
Unless the whole world is God's little science fair project where he's doing some research to see what will happen if he doesn't
Yeah, that was my
provide us
thought
with.
at one time too. Yeah.
So I mean, clearly I'm not sure you're being 100% serious, but I actually don't know what you mean by that. You think that, so in that case,
I'm not saying I think this is the case. I'm just speaking hypothetically that in terms of whether we can necessarily draw the conclusion you're drawing that, or what, because they're in the sense that your thinking is God would, if your thinking's right, God would make it obvious to us what God wanted, and that seems not to be the case. So I'm thinking maybe there's something else going on, and that it's intentionally being made to be hard for us to figure out, and that he's hot, and that it's one of these things like when we do research on animals and we try to not have them realize, or even on humans, well, then that creates some ethical issues, and try to have them not realize they're being studied or not know what it is we're studying about them, because it would screw up the experiment if they were in on it.
Yeah, it's hard to me to imagine a model of God where that makes sense, because, so the idea would be God creates the universe, including, a set of biological laws that result in people. God cares about that creation, but doesn't get involved with it. Just curious to see how it'll turn out. To me, that's either it violates one or two principles that I would associate with God. One is that God's knowledge understands how it'll turn out. And the second is that if God cares about humanity, then God has a stake in the game. God wants things to turn out well, which is of course where I come down. Bryce.
But
Yeah. Oh, I was going to echo in a sense what Stephen is saying, but because one of the things that I have fallen away from, Christianity has this, infinite God with infinite knowledge and infinite everything, and that doesn't make a lick of sense to me. And so the universe is enormously large, far larger than we can even conceive of.
Right.
We can't even see the edges of it. And the idea that everything happening in the universe is completely comprehensible to God, that just is difficult having that make sense to me. In a little world, yeah, but in a big universe like this, it's difficult for me to comprehend.
But I don't find that argument compelling, because what it says to me is that you can't conceive of the complete nature of God. And I would say God would not be God if we humans could conceive of the complete nature. And
it's not just that also. It's that God needs to see how things work out. If God already knows how things work out. He doesn't need to have a world. He just knows how it works out, and thank you very much. Okay?
Yeah, so I would say God is not completely omniscient. I would agree with that, and I would say God is not omniscient. But I would say that my understanding of God is that God cares deeply about humanity, and that caring is not magical. God doesn't magically interfere to eliminate disease, to stop a bullet shot in the air from hitting a nice person. But God teaches us how we should behave and wants us as partners in the perfection of the universe. That's a God I can respect and worship.
Sure. But yeah, okay.
Okay, and others can participate in this discussion too.
So Israel, is that next?
Yes.
Okay, Judaism is the soul of which Israel is the body. Living in all parts of the world, Israel has been held together by the ties of a common history, and above all, by the heritage of faith.
Let me stop for a second. Yeah, Alan Warshaw said he couldn't attend tonight, and he read this carefully before, and he was surprised at this discussion. So,
Okay.
So one of the things I want us to think about, and I'll be curious about your perspective on this. We're talking about 1937. I can't now remember.
Yeah, it was
But clearly
1937.
pre-48. So when people use the term Israel before there was a state of Israel, we can talk about the people Israel. We can even talk about the land of Israel. So there's Eretz Yisrael and there is Am Yisrael. And here I think what is being discussed here is the people Israel rather than the state of Israel. Because historically, it's an interesting question about Reform Judaism's sort of dance with Zionism. And
it's definitely talking about the people, not the land, because in about 2 sentences later, it refers to the land as Palestine.
Yeah. So I would say Eretz Israel in 1937 would be called Palestine.
Yeah. When did the terminology change? That now referring to it as Palestine is offensive and implying that it's something as to whose land it is and so forth.
Yeah. So Palestine is a name, and there's some controversy about whether it comes from the word for Philistine. And I always used to think that was true, and recently I read that may not be true. I think it was basically the name that the Romans gave to the land after they expelled all the Jews after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Certainly around Jerusalem, they changed the name of Jerusalem to Eila. No, it was Eila Capitolina. Yeah, so it relates to a Roman name, and I think everyone, Jews and non-Jews, referred to that land in English as Palestine. So if there's a newspaper called the Jerusalem Post, and pre-1948 it was called the Palestine Post. And if you have stamps issued by the Jewish authorities or the Yishuv in that area, those stamps, I think it would be the Jews issuing the stamps. Maybe it was Britain. They would be labeled Palestine. So I would say pre-48, the Jews referred to that nation as Palestine, controlled by the Ottoman Empire, then controlled by Britain after World War I.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So after I had to leave because of the phone call, but
no problem.
I got back to this. So in 46, when we got Israel or Jerusalem, whatever you want to call it.
Well, the state of Israel was declared in 1948.
Okay, in 48.
Right.
Did the United Nations, which made the deal, right? You do agree with me on that?
The United Nations declared a partition of Palestine in 1947 to a Jewish state and an Arab state.
Okay, fine. Now, when the Jews agreed to taking it over, did they change the name at that time to Israel?
Yes, when a Jewish state was declared in May of 1948, the name of the state was declared to be Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel.
Oh, okay. That's so they changed it. They actually were in the land of Palestine, but they changed the name to Palestine, to Israel.
Yes, I would say it was a land that was always referred to as Palestine. And with the declaration of the state, the Jews made the name of the state Israel. I mean, we have African states like the Belgian Congo, I think became, was it Zimbabwe? I don't keep track. But you have lots of nations when you had the colonies, and then in 1776, you have something born called the United States. So it's that in and of itself is not, sort of unusual or alarming.
Yeah, let's talk about Yugoslavia. Where's that? Okay, so
Yes, but that's another perfect example.
Just like 1776, what you had was 13 new nation states that all had pre-existing names. United States did not, at the time, simply was a phrase that took a plural verb that it wasn't a union, a single country, a union of take, or
yeah, it was
the name of a thing that took a singular verb until much later.
Until after the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, you have 1789 is the adoption of the Constitution. So, yeah, when we can talk about the terminology, but it's basically 1948. Before 1948, people would refer to the land as Eretz Yisrael and refer to the state, such as it existed, as Palestine. Right.
Okay, so two things. One, you were saying that it refers to the people. Look, living in all parts of the world, Israel has been held together by the ties to a common history. So it's the people. It's just in the second sentence. The second thing I wanted to say is my girlfriend has an original Palestine poster, okay? And it's pretty old, from before there was an Israel. She has it framed on her wall, and some people came over. One of them turned around and said, "I can't be in this house."
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And stormed out because she was supporting the Palestinians.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Yep. I mean, I've seen posters which say "Visit Palestine." There were travel posters. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, that's what that was. That's what she has. Visit Palestine.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, so why don't we? I think you were around here, though we recognize.
Yes, though we recognize in the group loyalty of Jews who have become estranged from our religious tradition, a bond which still unites them with us, we maintain that it is by its religion and for its religion that the Jewish people has lived. The non-Jew who accepts our faith is welcomed as a full member of the Jewish community.
Okay, so let me stop for a second. So there is definitely a recognition of what I would call peoplehood, and that is Jews who are not religious at all, who even reject Jewish religion, are still under Jewish law members of Am Yisrael. They are people. And in contrast to that, a non-Jew, and this is still true, a non-Jew who wants to become Jewish becomes Jewish by accepting Jewish religious, I would say, laws and principles. Okay, thank you. In all lands?
In all lands where our people live, they assume and seek to share loyally the full duties and responsibilities of citizenship and to create seats of Jewish knowledge and religion. In the rehabilitation of Palestine, the land hallowed by memories and hopes, we behold the promise of renewed life for many of our brethren. We affirm the obligation of all Jewry to aid in its upbuilding as a Jewish homeland by endeavoring to make it not only a haven of refuge for the oppressed, but also a center of Jewish culture and spiritual life. Throughout the ages, it has been Israel's mission to witness to the divine in the face of every form of paganism and materialism. We regard it as our historic task to cooperate with all men in the establishment of the kingdom of God, of universal brotherhood, justice, truth, and peace on earth. This is our messianic goal.
So it is interesting that certainly Reform, the rabbis are not rejecting the idea of Israel at this point in time and hold it as a particularly special place, but it is not, I would say, Zionism in its current form.
Mhm.
And then kind of a restatement of the messianic goal. Messianic Reform Judaism is clearly not that there will be a new king in Israel, the restoration of the temple and animal sacrifice. It's basically peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Okay, the next section.
Ethics.
Ethics.
Ethics and religion. In Judaism, religion and morality blend into an indissoluble unity. Seeking God means to strive after holiness, righteousness, and goodness. The love of God is incomplete without the love of one's fellow men. Judaism emphasizes the kinship of the human race, the sanctity and worth of human life, and personality, and the right of the individual to freedom and to the pursuit of his chosen vocation. Justice to all, irrespective of race, sect, or class, is the inalienable right and inescapable obligation of all. The state and organized government exist in order to further these ends.
So, this shouldn't surprise anyone. I would say this element is not so emphasized in more traditional Judaism, even to this day. There is a concept of working together with non-Jews for the sake of peace. So we want peace. We don't want to be fighting with non-Jews. But I would say in the more fundamentalist parts of Judaism, the goal is we want to sit over here and be Jews, and we hope the non-Jews just won't bother us. And if we work with them, it's for the sake of promoting that peace. There's a very well-known halakhic authority, Orthodox authority, named Soloveitchik, and he prohibited discussions of a theological nature between Jews and non-Jews. He basically said, if you're going to work with non-Jews, you can have food drives and clean up the streets kinds of things and good government, but we're not going to discuss theology with non-Jews.
Social justice. Judaism seeks the attainment of a just society by the application of its teachings to the economic order, to industry and commerce, and to national and international affairs. It aims at the elimination of man-made misery and suffering, of poverty and degradation, of tyranny and slavery, of social inequality and prejudice, of ill will and strife. It advocates the promotion of harmonious relations between warring classes on the basis of equity and justice, and the creation of conditions under which human personality may flourish. It pleads for the safeguarding of childhood against exploitation. It champions the cause of all who work and of their right to an adequate standard of living as prior to the rights of property. Judaism emphasizes the duty of charity and strives for a social order which will protect men against the material disabilities of old age, sickness, and unemployment.
Notice that the language is not gender neutral. It was
sorry?
specifically
This
will
is
protect men.
1937. Yes.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is not gender neutral. One of the things I really didn't notice until now is that these rights that Bryce read are prior to the rights of property.
Yes.
So I think you see what I would say what can only be described as a socialist element going on here. That human rights are more, as I was reading this, and of course we're wrapped up in presidential debates and so on, and this started sounding to me pretty left wing, and it is. And I remember in these days, there were a lot of Jewish socialists. I often talk about my grandfather, who was workman circle socialist. And I think I may have mentioned here, this is my father's father told my father that if he went and had a bar mitzvah, his father, would burn down the synagogue. And apparently this was a credible threat. So although he was Jewish and my father spoke Yiddish fluently, um, his father was anti-religious, and I think the Lotkers before him, were actually quite religious and were a long line of rabbis. But there was this sort of socialist element, and it seems like Reform Judaism is focusing on that.
You're such a disappointment to your grandfather.
I am, but
This
to my
is-
great
Yeah, but
grandfather.
there was a period of time where many Jews became communists, Marxists,
Yes.
socialists.
Keep in
And
mind, this is written during the Depression and before the Soviet Union became an enemy of the United States.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah. So
That's
this
not
is
true.
30. Well, hold on. So you had the Depression, which I'm not sure when the official end of the Depression is, but I don't. The Soviet Union certainly existed at this time. I don't know. I just plain don't know what the U.S. attitude toward the Soviet Union was, but there was a Socialist Party and there was a Communist Party, and they were acceptable political elements at this time. Clearly, not everybody supported everything, but clearly Reform Judaism is heavily influenced by social justice themes, still is, emphasizing on the prophets and prophetic visions, much more than ritual kinds of things.
By the way, one thing that you might find interesting is that when Thomas Jefferson wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, okay? Before that, I believe it was John Locke that had written The Right of Life, Liberty, and Property. That was what the original goal was, and that was what, and then I think Jefferson very clearly noticed that enshrining property in the Constitution was not the message they wanted.
Yeah, but I think even so, in the early days of the United States, property owners could vote in certain elections, and
no, I mean, you had to be a man of property to vote.
Right. So it's that, yes.
It's okay. Well, first, it's the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. But I don't know whether this is
Yeah, you're right.
true or not. Another explanation I heard was that in light of Boston Tea Party and various other things, they realized it would be too hypocritical for them to claim to be in defense of the right of property because they had violated it so much.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting.
Peace. Judaism, from the days of the prophets, has proclaimed to mankind the ideal of universal peace. The spiritual and physical disarmament of all nations has been one of its essential teachings. It abhors all violence and relies upon moral education, love, and sympathy to secure human progress. It regards justice as the foundation of the well-being of nations and the condition of enduring peace. It urges organized international action for disarmament, collective security, and world peace. That's changed.
That's what?
I think that's changed. I don't think that the nation of Israel at this point eschews violence.
Well, we've had discussions of this. There are wars that are kosher and the wars that are not kosher.
Exactly.
Wars of defense are not only kosher, they are called milchemet mitzvah. They are commanded wars. So there is a principle in Judaism that if someone's coming to kill you at 8 o'clock, if someone's coming to murder people at 8 o'clock, you get up at 7 o'clock and you kill them before they can murder.
And that's a terrible principle, by the way. I have to object strenuously because no one can know that. In fact, what that causes is I think someone's going to do that. In fact, I know it. So I'm going to go kill that guy.
So let me, without overly digressing, in 1967, you had tanks massing on the border. You had, in the Arab countries, you had planes on the runways. And it was very clear that the Arab countries were planning to attack. Now, you don't know anything with certainty. I agree with you. and
Mhm.
Israel struck first. It,
I understand that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's that free form idea of if you know, and this and
yeah,
that just
so it
gets
would happen.
thrown around so much.
No,
that it-
I understand, but that's the principle, and then you have to prove that you know. So if someone is breaking down your door and they have a gun, you're allowed. You don't have to wait for them to shoot you. That's
I
the
understand.
principle. And clearly,
But
there's going to be
that's
gray area.
different from getting up early, going out and finding them and killing them.
I didn't necessarily say finding them and killing them,
The,
You
but
said
the
get
other
up at 7 and go kill them.
yeah. Okay, so I'll say
the other
about-
problem with it is
Yeah.
that if everybody has this obligation, then other people
Didn't
are
say everybody,
obligated to
it's
kill,
Jewish
similarly
law.
obligated to kill you to keep you from killing them. So once anybody wants to kill anybody, nobody can make peace because everybody's
Water in the streets.
No, but first of all, it's not everybody. It's Jewish law, and in Jewish law, you are forbidden to get up at 7 o'clock and go kill people unless you are threatened by those people.
Well, and all I noticed was it abhors all violence, and I don't think that's true anymore.
Okay. Well, that's the standard that's being set in 1937.
I understand. I just said it's
Okay.
changed.
Let's continue with religious practice.
Religious practice. The religious life. Jewish life is marked by consecration to these ideals of Judaism. It calls for faithful participation in the life of the Jewish community as it finds expression in home, synagogue, and school, and in all other agencies that enrich Jewish life and promote its welfare. Though home has been and must continue to be a stronghold of Jewish life, hallowed by the spirit of love and reverence, by moral discipline and religious observance and worship. The synagogue is the oldest and most democratic institution in Jewish life. It is the prime communal agency by which Judaism is fostered and preserved. It links the Jews of each community and unites them with all Israel. The perpetuation of Judaism as a living force depends upon religious knowledge and upon the education of each new generation of our rich cultural and spiritual heritage. Prayer is the voice of religion, the language of faith and aspiration. It directs man's heart and mind Godward, voices the needs and hopes of the community, and reaches out after goals which invest life with supreme value. To deepen the spiritual life of our people, we must cultivate the traditional habit of communion with God through prayer in both home and synagogue. Judaism as a way of life requires, in addition to its moral and spiritual demands, the preservation of the Sabbath, festivals, and holy days, the retention and development of such customs, symbols, and ceremonies as possess inspirational value, the cultivation of distinctive forms of religious art and music, and the use of Hebrew, together with the vernacular, in our worship and instruction. These timeless aims and ideals of our faith we present anew to a confused and troubled world. We call upon our fellow Jews to rededicate themselves to them, and in harmony with all men, hopefully and courageously to continue Israel's eternal quest after God and his kingdom.
Okay, that's the end of this discussion. I would say this is a significant change from the Pittsburgh platform of about 50 years earlier, which sort of emphasized that we are rejecting those forms of worship that, that are, I can't remember the exact language, but that are no longer, we don't find them uplifting and meaningful. So, things like keeping kosher and so on. There's no specific endorsement of things like keeping kosher and mitzvot here. You will definitely see them in the 1999 principles, but you don't quite see them here. But it is praising holidays and prayer and synagogue. So there's definitely a getting back to sort of a traditional form of Jewish observance. And many of us have these little black books, which were the Union prayer book, which is being produced in these times, and they're very uplifting. They sound very Christian. I mean, in some of the hymns and things, I mean, you won't find the word Jesus, but in fact, in many cases, when you're reading the book where it says the role of the rabbi, instead of saying rabbi, it'll say minister. So there's I would say there was a conscious attempt in Reform Judaism at this time to sort of emulate religious practices that we find in the Americas. And, you know, I don't exactly know when rabbis in Cantor started wearing robes, but clearly that's not a traditional Jewish thing. I remember Sonia when she first came to Temple of Dad Elohim, you know, again, having grown up in Morocco, and she saw the rabbi in the cantor with black robes on. She was wondering what the heck was going on, because it was very Christian, and indeed Judaism, Reform Judaism, was emulating Christian forms of worship. In the very early days, there was even controversy about whether we needed to observe the Sabbath on Saturday, whether you could observe it on Sunday, so you could fit in more, you know, with the major community. And there was even one professor of Hebrew Union College who insisted on observing it on Wednesdays, just to, you know, be obstinate.
Contrarian, yeah.
Contrarian, that's a better word.
Yeah.
So, but by 1937, well, you're starting to see here accepting more of what we would consider an American approach to religion, and it's going to get more and more traditional as the subsequent statements go on.
The real solution, if you wanted to fit in terms of Sabbath observant days, prior to sometime in the 1800s, I'm not sure exactly what year, would have been moved to Alaska, because when it was a Russian possession, its calendar, it was 24 hours later there basically than it is now. Effectively, the international dateline was on the Alaska-Canada border instead of the Bering Strait. So according to secular law, it was Sunday there when it was Saturday according to Jewish law. And that way you could be observing the Sabbath at the same time as the Christians while it's still being on Saturday.
So it's that kind of worries that gives us 2 days of many holidays in the diaspora, except for Yom Kippur. Only 1 day of fasting, thank God. Erwin.
Yeah, I just want to mention that, for example, in Montreal, Quebec, the Christians observe Sunday. All the stores are closed Sunday, so that was much easier for Jewish stores and Jewish neighborhoods to be closed Saturday.
Be close.
Speaking of that as well.
Hold on, stop. I don't understand.
What?
Why was it easier? I mean, in many places, the Jews had to work on Saturday.
No, but in Montreal, if you
I think you mean it would be easier if they were closed on Sunday, unless I'm misunderstanding.
No. All major stores are closed in Montreal Sunday.
Right, I understand that. In the United States, that was true for many years also.
Yes.
Okay, but for instance, in Jewish neighborhoods, all the Jewish store owners close their stores Saturday.
And we're open on Sunday?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's interesting, because in the South in the United States, you couldn't be open.
Yeah, so I think that's true, and I'm sure it's localized, and I have no idea what Canadian law is on this.
No, it's localized. That's what I'm saying. It's localized, but I mean, it shows me the respect for each other's religion, you know.
Actually, I don't actually see where you're seeing that at all, because
right.
I mean, one of the challenges of Jews coming to America was the need to work on Saturday, because typically people had 6-day work weeks, and the day that businesses were closed were Sundays. So Jews often were forced to work on Saturdays. In fact, if you look at some of the older prayer books, there's even specific prayers basically praying to God to forgive us for having to work on Saturdays. So
when I worked at McGill Hospital in Montreal, I was never on call Saturday.
Okay, well, that they showed you that respect, which is admirable.
And I was on call if they wanted to be on call Sunday.
Yeah, and I do the same thing, actually, as a chaplain for the fire department. I always, let them know that if something comes up on Sunday or on Easter or Christmas or something, I'm your guy. Because all the other chaplains are Christian in the fire department.
Except under Jewish law, if you work in a hospital, then you are allowed to work any day of the week because you're saving a life, and you're allowed to work on Saturdays.
Yeah, so the issue then is, if by not working you put someone's life at risk, then you must work. So what you would normally do as an observant Jew is strive not to have to work on Shabbat. But if you're called to work on Shabbat because there's an emergency or a big fire or something, you would absolutely be required to go and work. I remember actually a responsa which said someone who was called in, this is an Orthodox responsum, if they're called in to work on the Sabbath and they have to go up, let's say, to the 8th floor to, report to wherever it is they're needed, should they take the stairs or should they take an elevator? And the answer is they must take the elevator. So they will be in better physical condition to do what they need to do when they get to the 8th floor,
so they get there faster.
They may or may not get there faster, but they'll certainly be more able to do what they need to do. So yeah, respect for life is.
But then when they leave, do they leave by the elevator or by the stairs?
I don't know. I guess once they leave, there is no longer any rush. So I would say, they would probably just leave by the stairs and strive to observe the Sabbath as best they can.
May I?
Sure.
The main hospital at UCLA, which is a beautiful, beautiful place, has an elevator that only operates on Saturdays.
I think what you mean is there is a Sabbath elevator.
Yes.
In addition to, it's actually a regular elevator that's put into a
The
Sabbath
regular
mode.
Elevators are still working, but then there is a special
and you'll
elevator.
find that in Israel also on Saturdays. And I would say in virtually every hotel in Israel, maybe not in Christian areas or Muslim areas, there will be a Shabbat elevator. And then the Shabbat elevator, it stops on every floor. So you don't have to press a button. So therefore you are not starting or stopping the flow of electricity. And there's even some worry about if the elevator has regenerative braking, where your weight is contributing to the production of electricity. I can explain that in more detail if people are interested, that it switches to regular braking on the Sabbath. So the answer is use all the cleverness that God gave you to try and obey the Sabbath and live your life. But if there's ever an issue between health and safety and observing the Sabbath, you focus on health and safety.
Okay.
And I wasn't aware that UCLA had Sabbath elevators. I would think Mount Sinai would, but I wasn't aware that the
UCLA is way down. I've been there.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, any other thoughts? I will send out a note, with the video and stuff. I will not be here next week, so I'm traveling, visiting family, but we'll pick up in 2 weeks with the next episode in the exciting development of Reform
So
Judaism.
you won't be here Monday or Wednesday?
No, Monday I will be here, and I will send out another reminder on that. We're continuing the discussion of the Amidah on Monday.
Okay.
Well, by the way, I think it's just good. I'm enjoying this because it lets me see the development of the Reform Judaic consensus.
Yeah, and it's I'm not even sure. Well, I mean, you give rabbis the benefit of the doubt by suggesting that they are representing the consensus. I would like to think
the consensus of rabbis.
It's the consensus of rabbis, without a doubt. Okay, so take care, stay well, and you know,
All
I'll
right.
see you when I see you. Some of
See you when I see you. Bye.
Thank you, and have a good weekend.
yeah,
You
thank you.
too.
I will.
Bye.
I plan to come on Saturday as well. So take care. Stay well.
Okay.